Today we are going to start a new topic, and the name of topic is shear stress in thin-walled member. So first of all, what are the thin-walled member? So thin-walled members are mostly these are the steel sections, maybe channel section, hot rod section, maybe cold work section. These are the sections where the thickness is very small as compared to the length of the member or element. In a conventional or traditional rectangular beam, normally the width of the beam is also the comparable with the depth of the beam. So normally the width of the beam is varying between height by 3 to h by 2 value or 2 by 3 of the depth of the beam. So, but in case of hot rolled section and specifically in steel section, the thickness is very small. So it means that maybe in that cases, the behavior of the section against shear might be different from a conventional beam section where the thickness is comparable to the depth. So we are going to discuss in detail how we can consider or compute the distribution of shear stresses in thin wall section, and due to these shear stresses, what are any extra or the shear stresses or behavior of the beam will produce. So first of all, thin wall section, you can find different definitions in different books. Mostly in most of the literature, they state that if the thickness of element is less than 1 by 10 or 1/10 of the length of the member, that can be regarded as a thin walled member, or maybe sometimes we can also call them plate element. So before that, I would like to give you a very quick review of shear formula that we have already discussed in mechanics of materials classes. So you know that whenever a line element is subjected to transversal loading, so that is regarded as a beam. So a column and a beam both are line elements, but the behavior or the type of the internal forces are different in both type of line element. If a line element is subjected to force along the longitudinal direction, that is referred as a column. But if a line element is subjected to transversal forces perpendicular to the length, then this is regarded a beam. So whenever the beam is subjected to loading, so the major deformation is deflection, and there are two type of internal forces produced in beam. So one is bending moment, and second is the shear force. So this bending moment and shear force at any section along the length of the beam, you can determine by applying the equilibrium condition. So you know that the torque moment acting at any cross section is summation of algebraic summation of all moment which is acting either on the left side or right side of the section. And then you have uh, you have already learned that how to plot the shear force and bending moment diagram. Actually, why we plot the shear force and bending moment diagram? Actually, we plot this to determine the section or to determine the maximum shear force and the bending moment which is being induced within the beam section. So for the beginner, or if you do not have the strong concept, then you need to plot the complete shear force and bending moment diagram. Otherwise, if uh, your concept are strong, so you might know that which point or which part of the cross section is subjected to maximum shear force and maximum bending moment. For example, the shear force is always maximum at support, and bending moment is maximum in case of a simply supported beam subjected to UDL in the center. And in case of cantilever, bending moment is maximum at free support, at sorry fixed support. So we are interested to determine maximum flexure stresses and shear stresses within beam. So maximum flexure stresses, they are function of bending moment and the distance of a layer or a point from neutral axis and geometric resistance about moment of automatic resistance against rotation. Similarly, shear stresses, they are function of shear force at any cross section. If V is maximum, then we will have maximum shear stresses, and A prime partial area and Y bar moment arm of the partial area, which is the static moment of area, divided by moment of inertia of entire cross section and the thickness of the layer. Actually, why we want to compute this? Actually, due to the flexure stresses, there are two types of internal forces which are produced in the beam section. Half of the section undergo tension and half of the section undergo compression. It means that due to the flexure stresses, there are two types of the internal forces acting on the cross section: tensile force and compressive. And due to the shear force, the shear stresses they are produces in the beam section. So these compressive stresses and tensile stresses and the shear stresses, they are compared with tensile strength, compressive strength, and shear strength of the material. So whichever will exceed their corresponding limit, that will govern the failure. If applied shear stresses are more than shear stress, the beam will fail in shear. If tensile stresses produced due to bending moment are more than tensile strength, then rupture will produce on the tension side or tensile crack will produce. If compressive stresses produced due to the bending moment are more than compressive strength of material, then the crushing will occur at a point where the compressive stresses are maximum. So actually, when we apply the energy or the load on the element, some of the load is is inducing the moment, and some of the load is used to induce the shear force in the beam section. Okay, when a beam is subjected to transversal loading, the shear stresses produces in longitudinal axis, and they tend to slide the fiber and the grain with reference to each other if we are having non-homogeneous material. So let's suppose if you are having your notebook or the register, so you can consider that that is comprised of different pages. So each page is the each layer, which is not bonded with each other. So if you bend, so you will see that all the pages they are sliding with reference to each other. Why they are sliding? Because the shear stresses between the two layers, they are more than the frictional resistance or the shear resistance available between the page, because the pages they are not connected with each other. So due to the sliding, so each page will slide with different magnitude. You can see that the sliding may be maximum in the center. We'll see in our upcoming slide, because the shear stresses they are maximum in center. But anyhow, when the pages they are sliding, so it means that they will slide to a differential magnitude or different magnitude. So in that case, sliding can be observed at the edges. So you can observe that the edges they are uneven or they are no more plane. So it means that whenever a beam is subjected to shear force or the shear stresses, the plane section does not remain plane. That is the assumption that we considered in derivation of Laguerre formula. It means that this formula is only applicable if a beam is subjected to pure bending moment. If beam is not subjected to pure bending moment, then the shear stresses will also produce. Then this formula may give the wrong answer, but answer will be on the higher side, on the conservative side. It means, and that we can that can still be used to compute the answer. It means that the assumption may become wrong. Why it become wrong? Because now the beam is also subjected to shear force. So you can easily bend. So if I increase the shear resistance, for example, if you are stapling your register, or if I will bond it, or I will put the nail inside, I will rivet it. Then if I will rivet it, maybe by making a hole, then if I apply the forces, so the cross section area of the nail or rivet, it will not let each fiber or grain to slide with reference to each other. So when the sliding will not occur because all the applied shear stresses are resisted by rivet or bolt or nail. Then if we are increasing the load, shear stress will keep on increasing, which is being resisted by bolt. But at the same time, when we are increasing the load, so movement is also increasing due to the movement. The flexure stresses, which are compressive on one side and tensile on the other side, they are also increasing. Then this beam will either fail when the tensile stresses on this side are more than tensile strength of this fiber, or if the compressive stresses occur which are produced on this side are more than the compressive strength of the fiber on the other side, or the failure will occur when the applied shear stresses are more than shear strength of the bolt or the shear strength of material. So we are comparing the shear stresses, compressive stresses, and tensile stresses where their respective strength, whichever will exceed their governing limit, that will trigger that type of the failure. So depending upon that, we may have the shear failure, tensile failure, or compressive failure. So I will quickly discuss the derivation. I believe that you have already discussed the derivation in detail in mechanics of materials. But just to refresh your concept, I will quickly give you an overview of shear formula. And in particular, we are going to discuss the assumption in detail because these assumptions are important with reference to thin wall section. So number one assumption is material is homogeneous and all stresses are within elastic range. So within the elastic range, E value will be constant. So if applied stresses are more than yield strength or the yield stresses, then the formula cannot give the accurate stress value. Second assumption is very important. So this assumption may be wrong for a quite for a rectangular section, but it may be correct for a thin wall section. Why? We shall discuss after derivation. And what is this assumption? Shear stresses are uniformly distributed over the entire width of the cross section. And so, whose mic was on? This student. Okay, anyhow, I will check from the log file. So I was discussing the assumptions. So the shear stresses are uniformly distributed over the entire cross section of the cross section. But anyhow, their variation along the depth will be parabolic, which I discuss. The formula is being derived for rectangular cross section, but it may also be applied to any other cross section with a plane of symmetry to calculate approximate value of shear stress. So it means that he says that this formula is only applicable for a rectangular cross section, which is a symmetrical cross section. So it means that this formula can also be applied to any trapezoidal section, which is having at least one axis of symmetry. If in a singly symmetric section, load is acting parallel to the plane of symmetry, then the formula may give the approximate value. It means that the formula will not give accurate value for a circular cross section or maybe for any cross section which is unsymmetric or which is not having any axis of symmetry. Why? We shall discuss in detail after uh, derivation of formula. So in the derivation, just simply assume that we are having a beam which is subjected to any arbitrary loading. maybe variable UDL, maybe at the same time it is subjected to bending moment F1, F2, or simply you can consider that there is a beam which is subjected to a UDL load. So the length of the beam is length L. So the length, so we are assuming the reference axis. So reference axis in cross-section direction, they are regarded as a XY. Z direction is length is regarded in Z direction. Cross section of the beam is having width B and height H, and H by 2 is a distance from neutral axis to the extreme fiber. So actually in this cross section we want to determine shear stresses at a layer which is along the length at the grain which is having a distance y1 from neutral axis, and on this area which is above the area partial area we are considering a small area differential area dA which is having distance which is having distance from the centroid of this dA to neutral axis as a y. Okay, now along the length we want to consider two cross sections. Maybe can both cross sections are apart or at a distance or differential distance dz along the length. So we are assuming that a section on the left side is regarded as a section 1, and due to the applied loading there is a moment m1 acting on the right side on this left side, and the bending moment and the shear force which is acting on the other side or at section 2 may be regarded as a V2 and M2, and moment at section 2 will be equal to moment at section 1 plus rate of change of bending moment, because bending moment is changing along the depth, sorry, along the length. So whatever is the change, if you are adding up that change within the moment which is acting on the other side, then you will have a certain moment here. This dm may be positive, it may be negative. It means that m2 may be more than m1 or it may be less than m1. Similarly, the shear force which is acting at section 2, it may be equal to shear force acting on the other side plus the rate of change of shear force along this thickness or this differential distance dz. So if the moment is acting in this side is the clockwise, then just to balance this, moment on the other side should be counterclockwise. Similarly, if applied shear force is acting upward, then resisting shear on the other side should be acting in downward side. So this is section 1, which is regarded as Mn, and section 2, which is regarded M1 and N1. The distance between them is dz.
सर
Yes.
सर M1 अप्लाइड मोमेंट था पिछली स्लाइड में सर, ये जो M1 है और M2 है ये अप्लाइड मोमेंट है,
ये दोनों applied है. We are taking from the bending moment diagram. Okay.
ओके सर.
Okay. Let me show you the one slide maybe. Just a wait, because I can share the slide of other class. So because I am just checking, I am having some solution of some problem or not. Just here. Okay, in this example, just consider that I am considering section 1 here on this side. This is the section 1. I'm considering simple loading just to make you understand. Okay, here. This is the section 1, and then I'm considering section 2. Both are very close to each other. Or you can assume that this is the section 2. Okay, you got me? So this section 1 and section 2. So what do you think? If you see the Venn diagram, this is M1, which is less. And this is the moment M2, which is larger. And if I sketch another line, maybe horizontal line over here, then you can see that distance from here to here, that is the rate of change of bending moment. Because this is M1, so distance from here to here is M1, and this distance is here from here to here is M1, and from here to here is rate of change of bending moment. So moment M2 is more than M1 in this case only. So it means that if you add rate of change of moment to M1, then you will have the M2. Similarly, shear force at section 1 is different and section 2 is different. But distance between them is dz. So you understand, gentlemen? Gentlemen, you ask whoever asked you the question. You got the idea?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So because normally in class I explain on the board, I sketch everything. So that maybe sometimes you might find difficult to apprehend the concept. But anyhow, so what do you think? Just I'm coming from this diagram. So in this diagram, you see that section 2, it is subjected to larger moment. M2 is more than M1. So it means that if I want to compute the flexure stresses at section 1, so I will have distribution of flexure stresses like this. One side will be, bottom side will be in tension, and the top side will be in compression, and they are acting toward the length or perpendicular to cross section. So the direction of the stresses is along the length of the member. Similarly, you can plot the flexure stresses by using formula sigma is equal to my over I. So distribution of flexure stresses on the other side will be this one. Okay, sigma 2 will be more than sigma 1. Stresses at section 2 will be more than section 1. Why? Because moment M2 is more than M1. Because in flexure formula, pi over I is a constant at any fiber. So the stresses, they are function of the moment. If you want to check stresses at the top part, so distance I will be same for this point M1 and sorry M and M1. Moment of inertia is also constant. So why the stresses at top point will be more on this side? Because movement is more. So now what we want to do? We want to just to avoid the confusion. That is dz, because we have to make sign convention consistent. Actually, now what we want to do, we want to cut this differential area along this layer. I want to assume cutting section here, and I want to determine the total shear stresses or resisting shear stresses or shear force between this layer that I consider. Just like in the beam, when you assume the cutting section in horizontal direction, you may consider the bottom part or you may consider the top part of the cross section or cutting layer because equilibrium will maintain. So we consider it because to simplify the calculation because it is subjected to simple forces. So if I consider this layer, so I just need to consider the stress acting only on this area. I will not consider this bottom stress. So if I want to apply the equilibrium equation, so equilibrium equations are always in terms of forces, not in terms of stresses. So this sigma 1, it can be converted into force. This sigma 1 multiply with this area over which they are acting. Area means this thickness of this layer, which is h by 2 minus y1 is the thickness of this layer multiplied by this b value. So this is the area, this width and this depth. If I multiply this stress sigma 1 over this area, I will have total compressive force F1 which is acting over here. So I can replace stress diagram to the force diagram F1. Similarly, if I multiply sigma 2, every stress acting on the area on this right side, that will be F2. Similarly, this shear stress, it can be converted into shear force. Shear stress acting on this layer, thickness of the layer is dz and width is equal to d. So they are acting on this surface between. So this is the force diagram. Okay. At the moment, you just forget that we do not have this df value. We are having only F1 and F2. F2 will be more than F1. Why? Because area on right side and left side are the same. But sigma 2 is more than sigma 1. It means that F2 will be larger than F1. So F2 is the compressive force which is acting with the compressive stresses on the right side. It means that if F2 is more than F1, then the sliding will occur in this side. So this F2, it will drag the above area to this side. So if it is not being dragged, it is balanced. So it is balanced. Why it is balanced? Because there are some resisting force or resistance offered by a material or and the thickness of this layer is providing the resistance. So to maintain the equilibrium, if the equilibrium prevails, then a df resisting force must be acting in this direction. So this df force will be equal to F2 minus F1. Okay, similarly, let me explain on the same way, maybe on the same diagram uh, that will avoid the confusion. Let me insert one arrow. And for this bottom, let me choose some different color. Yes. So if you want to consider the layer at the bottom, maybe because many students, they usually ask this question. If you want to consider the layer at bottom part, maybe partial area on the bottom surface. Let me increase the thickness. Yes. So if you want to consider the layer at the bottom part, so just understand that, just see, the bottom below the neutral axis, they are tensile stresses. And tensile stresses, they are acting away from the body. So F2 force with reference to bottom part is acting on the opposite side. And similarly, F2, they are also acting on the opposite. And DF force, which is acting over here, will be on opposite side with reference to bottom part. Just this difference. It means that what I want to show here, the shear force, horizontal shear force is acting on the right side with reference to top part, but it is acting to the left side with reference to bottom part. But if I will join them, if I consider neutral axis, lay along the neutral axis, so the magnitude of shear stresses along neutral axis with reference to top and bottom will be same, but they are reacting opposite. Why? If you just assume that if one fiber part is sliding with reference to each other, so the both parts, they are moving on opposite direction. So shear force, horizontal shear force, if it is acting on the right side with reference to top part, that might be acting to the left side with reference to bottom part, because top part is subjected to tensile stresses, sorry, compressive stresses, and bottom part is subjected to tensile stresses, but their magnitude will be same. So this I wanted to explain. Okay, next, df is equal to f2 minus f1, and f.
Excuse me, sir.
Gentlemen, it is better to ask the question at the end. Let me complete it because we still have maybe 10 minutes. So please, if you have question, please quickly ask the question. Calm down, please. Just quickly.
सर ये जो शेयर स्ट्रेस की डायरेक्शन हमने लेनी है, ये अलोंग द लेंथ लेनी है या अलोंग द परपेंडिकुलर टू द मेंबर लेनी है?
Actually, I think you missed the entire lecture. I'm going to discuss. These are the
सर
shear
ये
stress.
ना पहली स्लाइड में परपेंडिकुलर लिखा हुआ था और दूसरी स्लाइड में अलोंग द
मैं भी
मेंबर लिखा हुआ।
मैं आपको बता रहा हूँ अभी फिलहाल जो at the moment we are considering. I will at the end I will prove that are equal to each other. That's why that is confusing. I understand. Here, this V force is the shear force which is acting in vertical direction. You understand me? This thing I have to prove later on. And just to prove this, I have also this. At the moment, so let me explain this. Actually, when I will drive this formula, so I will discuss derivation in detail, then I will clear up your concept. So from this diagram, I just have proved that whenever two cross section, they are subjected to different differential bending, so they will always be a resisting shear force acting. So until now in this formula, I have considered applied shear. I'm just deriving this formula from the moment concept because section 1 is subjected to different moment and section 2 is subjected to different moment. So when the moment on the both sides they are different, so the resultant their forces will also be different. So it means that the difference of these resultant forces will produce the forces. Why these forces are causes the shear force and these forces as a normal force? Because they are acting perpendicular to cross section and they are acting parallel to this area or parallel to this cross section or this surface. You understand? At the moment until now, I have not discussed the concept of shear force or applied shear. But later on, I will prove it that I will link it with this DF force. And the moment I am discussing that F1 is the compressive force produced by the sigma 1 and F2 is the compressive force which is produced by compressive stresses at section 2 due to the moment M2. So I'm just saying that if F2 and F1 is more F2 is more than F1, and there is an equilibrium. Equilibrium means that the body is stationary. It means that why it is stationary, because there might be some resisting force acting at this layer. I am interested to determine this resisting force from this concept. Later on, I will relate it with shear force. So you need to be patient for a while. So at the end, I will take all your questions and will try to explain in detail. So this F2 is resisting shear force. This is not linked with the V force at the moment. This shear force is produced to balance the difference of F2 minus F1. So how can I compute dF? dF is equal to F2 minus F1. So if sigma 2 average stress sigma 2, they are multiplied by the area over which they are acting. Which area? Sorry, this depth and this width. So this depth and this width. So sorry, this depth and width is in the lateral direction, which is this one. So on this area they are acting. Above this layer, this part. So you can either consider this area is equal to h by 2 minus y1 is the width, sorry, is depth multiplied by this speed. Or you can write into the integral. If you know this total area of this differential portion, dA, and if you take the integration of this area from y1 to h by 2, then you can determine this area and you can represent in integral form. So sigma 2 multiplied by the differential area integration from y1 to by 2. H1, because we want to consider total area from y1 to h by 2. So this is an interruption in the internet, I guess. So sigma 2 is equal to my over I, because you know that flexure stresses, they can be computed or they are the function of the moment. Sigma 2 is replaced as a my over I, because load is acting in downward direction, so movement it is produced about x-axis. So corresponding pneumatic resistance Ix will be taken. Similarly, sigma 1 is equal to m1 y over I, and this parameter integral of area limiting from y1 ranging from y1 to h by 2, it can be taken as a constant, and m2 minus m1 we shall have this value. And now we are replacing the df into the shear stress, and df will be equal to, because shear stresses they are equal to force over area. So if we are multiply the shear stress with the area over which they are acting, so df is equal to tar multiplied by b into dc. So we want to determine the shear stresses at the bottom, and area of this bottom area is equal to dc and multiply by this width. It means that this dz and later dimension is b. So m2 m1 is the rate of change of bending moment or difference of the bending moment from m2 m1. So here it is a proof. If m2 minus and m2 and m1 they are same, then there will be no shear stresses produced. This component will be zero. So when M2 and M1 are 0, it's mean M2 and M1 are same. It means that that is a pure bending moment. It means that if we are having this constant bending moment diagram like this, it will not be parabolic.
सर यानी जैसे कैंटिलीवर बीम में होता है
Then no cantilever beam में भी नहीं. Just like you perform the experiment in mechanics of material, you created a pure bending moment zone in the center. So you use the 4-point loading. So bending moment diagram is straight. It means that moment at M2 and M1 is the same. So where we are having pure bending moment, shear force is 0. So just you can write the pure bending moment in Google and you can find its literature. So it means that if M2 and M1 they are same, this parameter will be 0. Then it means that F2 and F1 will be same. So it means that there will be no shear force produced if F1 F2 are same. So if we bring D and DZ to this side, so dm over dz, that is equal to rate of change of bending moment over the length. So rate of change of bending moment is equal to shear force. You already know. B is equal to rate of change of bending moment. If you take the slope of bending moment, that will be shear force. So we are replacing dm over dz by V. And this is the definition of first moment of area or static moment of area that you determine that expression you use to determine centroidal location or y bar value of the area. So this can be written as a q, static moment of area or first moment of area, or a prime into y bar. Why a prime? Because that is the partial area, not full area. Area above the layer or below the layer, and y prime is the distance from the centroid of partial area to the neutral axis. So if you substitute all values, we shall have this expression. I don't need to explain what are V, but here the question arises. Very interesting question that the student earlier asked. So actually, what I want to explain in derivation, did we consider any shear force? No. We just consider the movement on the both sides. Actually, the shear force, the shear stresses which are produced in horizontal direction, actually these are the function of the bending moment or rate of change of bending moment. Actually, we use the stresses, these shear stresses, they are acting in horizontal direction, and they are function of the shear force which is acting in perpendicular direction. How come this is possible? Or maybe if you do not have the strong concept, that might be confusing. What I want to say is that we computed horizontal shear stresses in this direction, and these stresses, they are function of this shear force. It means that the stresses which are acting in horizontal direction, that should be the function of any force which is acting in this direction. How come they are uh, depending upon a shear force which is acting in vertical direction? So that we will prove in our upcoming slides. So B is the transversal shear force acting at any cross section. Q is the first moment of area or static moment of inertia of partial area above or below the layer. I is the moment of inertia of entire cross section, and B is the thickness or the width of cross section. So I will share this slide with you so you can study this slide yourself. I have already explained. So we still
पिछले
have
स्लाइड्स भी रहती हैं
पिछले वो सेंड कर दूंगा इंशाल्लाह, मैं आज ही इस वीकेंड में सेंड कर दूंगा, ठीक है? ओके, नेक्स्ट इज द कंसेप्ट ऑफ shear flow. actually, you might remember that maybe you might have discussed with Dr. Qasim in plate girder chapter when you design the weld between the flange and the web junction, you use the concept of shear flow. You computed the shear flow which is acting in the longitudinal direction. So then you compare the shear flow with weld value to determine length of the weld. Actually, when we are dealing with thin cross section, so in thin cross section or the thin walled member, thickness is very small. So actually the stress, what is the definition of stress? Force acting per unit area. Force acting per unit area means that how the force is distributed along the length and the width of the cross section. So if the thickness is very small, we can assume that force is uniformly distributed along thickness and it is only changing or distributed along the length. So in that case, we have to consider or use another concept which is regarded as a shear flow. So what is shear flow and why it is regarded shear flow, we shall discuss in detail. But let me explain. If shear stress tau is multiplied with the thickness or the width of the cross section, then we obtain a quantity Q, which is referred as a or called as a shear flow. So, which is force acting per unit length. So, shear flow represents the shear force or longitudinal shear force acting per unit length transmitted across the section at any level or at any layer y1. So if shear stress is multiplied with the width of the cross section, so B will be cancelled out. So shear flow is simply equal to V Q over I or V A prime over I. So units are force acting per unit length. It means that we can either use the concept of shear flow or shear stress for uh, thin wall section. So shear stresses does not occur in a beam subjected to pure bending. Pure bending movement means that if the movement is constant along the length, region which is having constant bending movement, which is not changing, is subjected to zero shear force or zero shear stress. Sliding or shearing of fiber does not occur in homogeneous material. Homogeneous material means that in steel section or maybe any other metallic beam, sliding cannot occur because they are strong in shear. However, in wooden beam, fiber they are running along the length, so they are weak in shear at their intersection. So it means that they can easily be split up. So it means that in if in a wooden beam when it is subjected to transversal load, so shear force is maximum at support. And we also know that shear stresses they are maximum along the neutral axis. So due to the maximum shear stresses, if these shear stresses are more than shear strength or the friction between or the shear strength of the fiber interlaminar shear stresses, then the sliding will occur or this type of the shear crack will produce. So I will stop here. So next time we will start from here, and from here I will give you the concept. Whenever horizontal shear stresses or force they are acting at any layer, the same point is also subjected to the vertical shear force which is having same magnitude. So that's why the horizontal shear stresses they are the function of this shear force V that I will discuss in detail in our upcoming lecture. So at the moment, if someone is having quick question, he can ask me very quickly.